Hello, Mind Body Energy Project. And Tiffany, hi.
Yes, I was waiting for that. I'm kidding, I wasn't.
How
Hello,
are you
everybody.
today?
Pretty good. Yeah, I'm looking forward to discussing these cards. It's so fun because even though I've studied them a lot, I keep learning more and it's starting to feel even better.
Yeah, it is. It really is. I'm glad that I am allowing myself to go deeper with the minors because in the past I've focused so much on the majors and I've been kind of passive with the minors. So I'm so glad we're doing this journey too. Um, just so everyone knows, we're recording this on the solstice. So happy
Ah, yes,
summer.
yes, it is.
Hmm.
I'm a little sad about it because I know this is the longest day and then it goes downhill from here. That's a
Oh gosh,
terrible way of putting it.
that is a terrible way of
I
looking at it.
know.
No, it's a beautiful day, like a day to really like for me, the solstice, if you guys haven't done this already, I mean, it just reminds me of a time of like welcoming like new life, new light, and like
Mhm.
breathing in new energy into whatever you're focused on and like, just considering like allowing this expression, like
Yeah.
allowing yourself to express like
Hmm.
big and bold and light and woo,
Yeah. Basking in the light of everything.
basking in the light.
Hmm.
Yep.
Because it's longer these days. We have a lot more of it.
Yeah. Yeah, we do. So in this tarot journey, so far we have been talking about the Suit of Cups, which we are now coming to an end with today. And we've gone through Ace through 10, the pip cards, and now we are moving into the court cards.
Hmm.
And so we just wanted to chat a little bit about the court cards before we go into the ones we're looking at, only because these do tend to be
Tricky.
challenging.
Hmm.
Yeah, a little tricky. And part of the reason we were talking about beforehand is in readings, a lot of times the court cards can be symbolic of people. Like the page and the knight can be symbolic of people who are like maybe younger, and the king and the queen could be symbolic of people who are more mature, maybe like parents or things like that. But they don't always represent people. And yeah, I mean, it really depends on the reading itself. What is the topic of the reading? What other cards come up in the spread? I'm going to sneeze. How I know you use them more for self work. So
Uh-huh.
without doing predictive, do they ever symbolize like people for you? Or is it just the other energies of them?
Yeah, I mean, we had discussed this earlier, Yolanda and I. The court cards, they do get a little tricky because I feel like in readings they do symbolize people, and it really does depend on the cards around it as to who or what that means. But as far as self-reflective work goes, I try to see in the cards for myself, like how is this card reflecting back to me what's going on in my situation. But I have at times when whatever reading I was doing for myself and kind of trying to dive deeper into my stuff, it would come up and I'd be like, oh, there was a person I could attribute it to, and I was like, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But I don't. I'm less inclined to use them predictively versus self-reflectory. Is that right? Is that the right word?
I've never heard of reflectory, but reflective.
I feel like it works, so we're gonna
Yeah,
go with
whatever. It
it.
works for the podcast.
Yeah. So it has come up and shown it to be a person. And maybe that's my subconscious being like, hey, there's a situation here with this person, dive deeper into that and understand it.
Hmm. Yeah, and when we were talking before, I mean, just to give an example of this, I was thinking of like the Queen of Cups. Like, yes, she could be symbolic of like a mother, like, someone who's nurturing, or on the other hand, she may be reflective of someone who is very artistic and maybe using their creative endeavors as like part of their path or
Hmm.
something that they're focused on. So, yeah, I mean, again, that's where trusting our intuition and allowing the cards to kind of speak to us and noticing what comes through. Because when we read cards and just go with the descriptions in the book, we can limit what the actual messages are. So that's why it's really a good idea and why we're doing this, to build your own relationship with the cards, build your own connection with them, so that you can allow yourself to dive into the layers of what they are, so that when you do use them, you have so much more to pull from.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, your intuitive mind can pull from that pool of information that you've already connected with.
Yeah. And speaking specifically of the court cards, because they can be a little bit challenging to really build that relationship with, at
Mm-hmm.
least I have found that. I like that we're doing this by suits because it gives us a little bit more time to focus just on each one of the court cards within what the theme of the suits is. Because I found in the past too, when I'm trying to learn all of them at once, I get to the court cards and I get tripped up. I'm like, okay, so the queen, she's a creative, intuitive woman of cups, but like the queen of swords, like, she's just this. And so then my mind kind of just wants to put labels on it versus just looking at a suit and figuring out how all the court cards work together.
Yeah, and one way too, just like as a generalized theme, sometimes you can look at the court cards, like and the page of any suit is usually like the study of that suit. Like, what would that mean to be an examination or contemplation or study of whatever that particular suit is? That maybe, you can look at the page like that. And then the knight is usually related to, responsibility to others or taking action, but again, related to that suit. So how would that translate very specific to whatever that suit is? And then the queen is often the creative energy related to that suit, or the appreciation of whatever that particular suit is. And then the king is, power, success, or social responsibility related to whatever that suit is. So those are just also some like generalized ways you can look at the court cards, and then again, keeping in mind what suit they represent.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
Yeah. So, with that in mind, because we're doing the cups, we thought today a good topic for this would be emotional and intuitive development. We can
Mm-hmm.
consider our own emotional and intuitive development by looking at the information or the messages of these court cards.
I love this topic because it's near and dear to my heart.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love emotional intelligence, and I think that that should be taught in schools. And I think maybe it's starting to lend itself to that, but I think it's a very integral topic for our evolution and consciousness, and especially like the more open we are to things like social media and we're more open to other people and other cultures, we get a little bit overstimulated, and I think the emotional intelligence, the more we strengthen that muscle, the more adaptable we are. And so then maybe we'll find a little bit more semblance of order and neutrality versus
Well, it's funny you say adaptable, and you're talking about the suit of cups and water, right? But
yeah.
it reminds me of too, I mean, in a lot of ways, when we talk about emotional and intuitive development, that's a big part of all of us that has been suppressed in a lot of ways.
Yes.
We, just like what you're saying, it's not something that we're taught. And so, growing up for a lot of us, whether we were told to repress our emotions, don't cry, put on a strong face. In a lot of ways, we're told to like have poker face in situations, or emotions have often been looked at as a sign of weakness. And, we are often afraid of other people's emotions and like what it triggers in us. So I think we all have a lot of wounding around intuition and emotion, just from what we've been told about these things,
Mm-hmm.
even though they're part of our makeup. So it reminds me of, again, like the whole thing I love to talk about, our self-mastery, and how important it is for us to understand these layers of ourselves, because they're part of our makeup. So of course
Yeah.
you want to learn how to navigate your emotion instead of, being afraid of it, being overtaken by it, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, what do you feel about the page?
The
Oh,
page.
the Page
Yeah.
of Cups.
Well, I feel like it's a very light card.
Mhm.
There's a fish coming out of the chalice and it almost looks like they're having a conversation. So it's a little bit like, oh, dreamy. It's very dreamy. And so to me, it kind of gets a sense that he's like really feeling into all emotions and tapping into, he's open to all ideas of what the emotions that are coming in. And because the river behind him, like the emotions are flowing. And so it's just a very open space. There's nothing here like kind of blockading the water, or even him. I mean, he's in this open space talking to a fish
A
that's in a
fish.
chalice.
Yeah.
Like, does it live in that chalice? I don't know.
Well, it's funny because if we do think about the page representing the study of whatever the suit is, right? So this page, it could be like the study of emotion or study of imagination. And the fish, in a lot of ways, could be symbolic of like development of our psychic ability, or he's very imaginative. Like, is the
Hmm.
fish really there? You
Hmm.
know, did he call it forward from the river that's behind him so that he could examine it? It is very playful, you know, and it gives me that feeling of almost the fool in the way, like this energy of like maybe being a little naive. But
Yeah.
in that, we have this openness. We allow
Right.
ourselves to explore what does it mean to be intuitive or emotional. And even his turban, I think on
I
yours
was just
too.
gonna say that.
Yeah, there's like a thing at the third eye
Oh
space of the
yeah.
turban.
And the turban itself looks like a wave,
It
so it's almost
does.
saying like it's kind of like enveloping his head, and his mind is
Hmm.
consumed with emotion.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I mean, I think this speaks to the possibility that lies within our intuition and our emotion, and what we can really discover about ourselves if we allow ourselves to um, go in it with like an openness and not so
Right.
heavy or afraid of it, you know? Like, what
Hmm.
would you really learn or discover in that?
Yeah, it's he's just like, ooh, what is that? A
It's a
little mouse?
fish.
Oh,
That's
that's
a
oh, I
fish.
see. A koi. It looks like a
Hmm.
koi.
Yeah.
Yeah, so pretty. I love the colors.
What were you going to
Um,
say?
I don't remember now. It's making me think of the opposite of Scorpio.
Oh,
because
oh,
because there are no boundaries, because it is
right.
so open.
Maybe more
And
Piscean.
yes, and that um shoot, where was I going with this? How when we do put up barriers to our emotions, that we blockade anything else from coming in, and thereby we lose out on opportunities to learn more and grow. And when you really dive into, you allow yourself to be free of the shackles of any limitations, you're really allowing in all of the information to come in so that you can really learn and experience it. And this card, because that's the one thing that I really see about this, is that there's no boundaries around him. Like, he's totally free, and really he looks very like willing to dive into it.
Well, it's interesting too that the page can represent like a younger person. It's making me think of how children, like they just let it out, you know, like
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
like, "Ugh," like, what are you crying about? And adults tell them like, stop crying, you know, like
yeah,
very like knock it off. But they are all in it. Like if they have a feeling come up, honey, something erupts in them, they are gonna cry. They are going to have a
yeah,
tantrum. They're gonna do whatever. But again, I mean, instead of telling them to stop, like if we observe that, like maybe we would even have more understanding of like, you know, nurture them instead of like, oh, what's
right,
coming up for you? Why do you feel that way? Like help them to understand, or even
yes,
yourself to understand.
right,
But on the intuition side, it reminds me of how a lot of people are afraid to develop their intuition because they're afraid of what they may see, or they're afraid of
uh-huh.
like, you know, these types of things. And then a lot of times when we decide we're going to, then we have this control around it of like, I want to be psychic and see images, and that's the only way I will
Yeah,
accept and believe that I'm intuitive. Whereas
and
when,
expectations of
yes,
what we think it should be.
totally. And the only way you will actually allow yourself to truly develop and understand your way is to have that openness and
Right.
to be able to play in that and see what really does come through for you. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think the page obviously has a lot of layers for us to learn from.
Speaking to the emotional development thing, I was talking to my mom earlier, and she went to my niece's kindergarten graduation,
Uh-huh.
and there were different ages of kids in that school. And I guess one of the kids, one of the 4-year-old kids, she was like, he was the biggest, tallest kid. Like, he didn't look young because he was so big. But
Hmm.
I guess they were all sitting down and they had to stand up to sing a song. I guess the kid loud enough for everybody to hear was he looked at the teacher, he's like, I don't want to do this. And I just thought it was so funny because I could see that playing out. And I said to my mom, I'm like, good for him. Like, he was just really speaking the way that he was feeling. He was probably like, there's 50 adults there staring at all these kids with their expectations to like sing the song. And the kid's like, I don't really feel like doing this.
Yeah.
And then it made me think too about like the parents, like, were they mortified because they're like, oh my God, my kid is that kid.
Right.
Or
Right.
were the parents just like, oh, okay, cool. Like Johnny doesn't want to do it. And he spoke his mind, like, good for him.
Yeah. And
And a lot of times our emotions get suppressed by the way other people, their own indiscretions. If the parents are insecure and like care about what other people think and other judgments coming in, they
yeah.
squash that kid's emotional expansion just by being like, don't.
That's what happens to us, right?
Yeah,
And that's why
sure.
I think the cool thing about these particular court cards is they really show us like that there are aspects to all of it that is good for us,
Mm-hmm.
and also if we're too extreme in one particular part of it, it can be a hindrance or, create challenges for us. So even like that with that situation with the kid, I mean, like, yeah, again, like with the page, like, why not just like let it rip? Like, this is what I feel, this is what I want. And while that may be very healthy for us, we also have to have some temperance in knowing like when maybe that's not the most appropriate. And I mean, maybe for the little school thing, like, really, who cares? Like, whatever. But, there will be situations in life. So that's where our like discernment comes in. Right. So, but it's good to not suppress those layers of ourselves and knowing that they're accessible to us. Like maybe there are times where we could just be free willy-nilly, like, this is what I want,
Yeah.
Yeah. Something about what you said too, it reminded me of the fish being like calling it out of the water and into the cup. And it's like, that fish is not going to survive in that cup. However, he's getting an opportunity to explore this like aspect of his imagination, and then you could put the fish back over in the ocean or wherever that water is, right?
Yeah.
It's 11:11. But anyway, it just reminds me of too that dance of like sometimes we can go all in, but then we have that ability to step back into different spaces.
Put ourselves in a different environment.
Mm-hmm. Now, I guess that's a great segue into our night.
Yes.
So the night again, if we think about responsibility to others and action, this night, he's struggling with action, no?
He is a little bit, yeah, he's moving a little bit slowly into it. But it does look as though he's moving in a direction, but carefully.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the carefully aspect is too, like with the horse, it's showing that foot that's lifted is very diligently looking, watching where it's going.
Yeah.
And then the knight is very upright. So it's like he's holding his own in observation as he's moving towards it, but the wings on his hat and on his feet kind of lend itself to understanding that he has a capacity to go swiftly into it.
Yeah. And I think that's the key. Like, you have the capacity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's interesting too. It reminds me of like the energy of people who may be suppressing their emotions,
Mm-hmm.
like perhaps like you have the capacity to tune into your emotional design or to recognize your emotions. But a lot of times, like for whatever reason, like maybe it's just not something you're that connected to, or it may be lacking to some degree. It reminds me of like it just made me think of like in astrology, and sometimes we look at what's on our charts and maybe we are lacking a particular element, and maybe there's like, no water in your chart, you know what I mean? But it doesn't mean that you can't access that. You can do certain things to allow yourself to tap into that water or that emotion or that intuition. So it can, to me, I mean, he's still very upright, so it doesn't seem like he's
not cowering away from it.
Right. He's just moving at his own pace, really.
Yeah.
So it just reminds me of like people like that. Like maybe there's like a grace to it, or maybe, whatever. They are just not overly expressive or overly
This is
excited.
a little bit more Scorpio emotion, would you say? It's kind of like it's a little bit structured, and it seems like he's being a little bit more analytical about it.
Mhm.
Like they went in and like with the page, and it was kind of like unbounded observation and experience of it. And now he's kind of like, okay, I know what I know, and now I'm gonna like present and drive into this in a manner. I'm gonna take action into the emotion with a little bit more um, experience and education, a little bit
So
more.
more of like a controlled emotion,
Yeah,
like a little
yeah.
more controlled. Yeah. Um, it's interesting because it can be in a lot of ways like this energy of like being non-committal, you know?
Mhm.
Like it makes me think of like maybe in relationship where one person's all in and the other person's like, no, like I'm just kind of testing the waters. Let's not go ahead with labels and get all crazy just quite yet, you know?
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean that they're not interested, or it doesn't mean they're not, you know, want to be a part of whatever the situation is, but maybe they're just not. It reminds me of me.
I
and
had a feeling you were going there.
well, yeah, it reminds me of me in a lot of ways, but especially too with like plans. Like all of my friends know I am the worst. Like, am I going to commit fully? No. It doesn't mean I'm not interested in your invitation. It doesn't mean that I don't want to hang out or do whatever it is. But to get me to like hard line commit to plans, it really, it hurts my body. So yeah.
That's funny because when you say that and I look at this card, if I apply it to me, and somebody like asks me for about plans, like I'll approach it very cautiously because if I commit, I'm committed.
Mhm.
So I'm like kind of looking at everything. I'm like, I want to make sure that if I tell you, I'm going to stay true to my word, and like that's the way it's going to be. So I feel like I kind of approach that like, let me just let me take a minute. I'm going to look at my calendar. I'll get
Yeah.
back to you, because once I commit, I'm full on in.
Yeah. So it's interesting, like just looking at these two together, the contrast, like one is all in and the other one is kind of like, you know,
Yeah.
I'm gonna,
Yeah.
I'm checking it out, but you know, I'm not like playing with fish and things.
And that comes in to speaking both to the emotional development and to intuitive development. It's like you got to dive all in to get an understanding of everything that's possible in the realms of
Hmm.
emotion and intuition. And then you start to refine, because then you're like, okay, well, this is what suits me for who I am.
Yeah.
And oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That is very different than this one, I feel like.
Well, what's interesting, and some tarot decks do this instead of calling them like king, queen, page, and knight, they have other labels. So in this deck, it's the daughter of cups and the son of
Oh,
cups.
oh, okay.
And it's interesting when you think about like culturally, like the girls are thought to be more emotional, like the page is like all in with his
Hmm.
emotion and imagination, whereas like um men or boys, younger people, are thought to be like more like, or taught to be more like, no, you just hold that in. So
Hmm.
maybe more discerning with
Yeah.
their emotional expression. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, the night though for me, I think I am probably. mm, I actually dance between the two if I really think about it. Like I could see some of the night energy in me depending
Hmm.
on situation, but
Hmm.
also, you know, there are times where I'm like, let's go in, let's dive on in and see what
Yeah.
happens. Yeah.
I think anybody could really utilize both of those aspects. And I would advise to try to open yourself up to that idea as well, because we can label ourselves and think we're one way or another, which
Hmm.
also limits us from experiences. But to see yourself in a different light is very informative as well.
Yeah. It also reminds me of, this is the last thing that's popping in my head, I think, but it reminds me of like the caution sometimes we take with like emotion and intuition. Like he's standing up straight and it looks like, yes, he's moving ahead, he's holding the cup sturdy. But if you look at the horse, like maybe he looks a little cautious, like, listen, man, we got to go slow into this. So again, like even thinking of relationships or maybe, again, or even our intuitive development, like sometimes we do have just like a little feeling of being a little cautious and not just wanting to, you know, buy the whole farm. Is that
Hmm.
an expression people say?
Yeah.
Something
Yeah.
like that.
Buy the farm, sell the
Yeah,
farm.
buy the farm. I don't
I don't
know.
know, something like that. There was something about a farm.
Yeah. Buy it, sell it, whatever.
She has a whole farm.
The knight needs to check it out before he commits.
Yeah, it's reasonable.
Yeah.
I feel you, Knight. I feel you.
Yeah. So then we have the queen.
Yes.
How do you feel about her?
I like her. I like her. Yeah, I feel like she is a little contemplative,
Mm-hmm.
that like she's really looking into things and trying to really understand the aspect of emotions, and that she's capable, like she's got her toe in this flowing river that she's sitting in front of, but her other foot is on ground too, so she's able to adapt both, like having a good sense of stability and grounding, and then also tapping into emotions, which a lot of times I think we associate emotions with ungroundedness.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we tend to like see somebody having an emotional reaction and think that they're a crazy person. Well,
Yeah.
that just isn't true. If you're holding in all of your emotions, you're a crazy person, because that will show up somehow else.
Yeah.
And it's time to flip the switch on this um, perspective of emotions. You know, to be a balanced person, we need to understand full expression of it, and then in groundedness in what that emotion is informing us about.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, of all of the four court cards, she's the only one actually touching the water.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that her cup is so fancy. I mean, that
So
cup right
fancy.
there, honey, she did
Mm-hmm.
the daggone thing with that cup. She's like what do those people do? What do they call them? Like the people that do like like crafting. So in this way too, I mean, the queen can be a great symbol of what we have achieved or accomplished that was based on our creative efforts or our creative
Yeah.
endeavors. And when you think of the queen, if she is about like the appreciation or the creativity of a particular suit, what's so interesting is because she is, like you pointed out, she's sitting on the land, but her feet are in the water. It is also a message of like infusing emotion or love into the action that we take. So, we talk about, or I've said on something before, I don't know, but about the energy that we put into something often, is more important than the actual thing or action itself. So if
Mm-hmm.
you are creating something or doing something, but you're creating from a space of fear, that is not going to be as powerful for you than if you are able to create or do or take action from a space of like love or
Mm-hmm.
compassion. Those are much more, like beautiful creations or output. So the queen, I think, is a really good reminder of having that balance and mindfulness of the energy that we're infusing
Yeah.
into
When
what we
I
create.
An example of that is when I cook. People are always like, "Oh my God, this is so
Oh,
good. Like, what did you make it with?" And I'm like, "Love." You know, and
I
I
love
do when I cook, I always have this um I always feel like it's going to I it's being made for somebody, or it's being made for health purposes, you know, and like I just have this confidence that it's going to be good, because there's a lot of intention that goes in when I cook. And that's kind of one of the things I think about often. I won't say that I do that in everything that I do, and I should.
that. Hmm.
Cooking is just an easy place for that to happen kind of on its own. So I
Totally.
really do think, you know, and it's funny, every time somebody asks me, like, this is so good, how'd you make it? I'm like, it's love is the main ingredient.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Well,
I think
that's
that energy really permeates things.
I think it does too. And a lot of people do say that like food tastes better when it's made with love. And I'm
Yeah.
sure it's true. I mean, like, of course, why
Hmm.
wouldn't it be? Right. And it
Yeah,
makes me
I
think
set
of
those
how
vibrations.
a lot of people Reiki their food,
Hmm.
before they eat it or before they cook it for that same uh, intention. But with this queen, she also, I mean, looking at the other two, like the page, he's all in, maybe a little willy nilly, which can be, useful. And the knight, who may be a little more cautious. Again, I think you mentioned she was balanced, and it reminds me of how we can be very loving and compassionate, even very intuitive, right? We can be all of these things, but we always talk a lot about the importance of being grounded, right?
Hmm.
And so that there is a sense of maturity with our emotion, or a sense of maturity with how we use our intuitive ability and intuitive gifts. And it's not just this willy-nilly out there thing that is not practical, right? So she
Mm-hmm.
reminds me of, like, in a way of like practical emotion or it can be very compassionate and loving and intuitive and creative, but it's grounded into reality, so to
Yeah.
speak.
And I think if we look at the progression of the cards, um, I think once we get to the queen, it's almost like she's gone all in and experienced all of the aspects of the emotions and like really opened herself up to it.
Yeah.
And then the knight is kind of refining and like checking things out now with a little bit more caution in order to get a deeper message about it. And she's kind of now at this point, she's like, yep, okay, I get it. Like I allowed myself to learn. I dove into the research of it. And so now she's kind of sitting on her throne, literally, in a balanced state of like, I've come to understand this. I know how it integrates into me and my experience, and I've taken responsibility for it. So it's like she's confident in what she's doing with what she's learned about emotions and
this
intuition.
this these three so far, they remind me of just my journey with this work. Like, I think I started out like the page, I was so excited, and I was like, like, woo, all of these things, all of these classes, all of these modalities, like, man, I surely was. I just dove right in, and it was amazing. And then the night energy in that for me was, I did have some skepticism,
Mm-hmm.
and not with my own experiences, but like with what other people would tell me or what they would say their experiences were. I was a little cautious. Like, I wasn't just blindly believing what I was told or what I was taught. For me, it had to be very experiential. And so I really had this dance of that night and that page energy when I
Mm-hmm.
first got into this. And I had to, once I decided I wanted to do it as work and share it with other people, I had to step into more of the energy of the queen, where I was like, okay, well, I can, understand how these intuitive gifts and like creating things are fun and useful for me, but how do I make it more practical so that I can share it with other people?
Mm-hmm.
And what has been the driving force behind me wanting to share with other people, honestly, is the love. Like, I genuinely love humanity, and I genuinely hope to, be a contributing factor to like change that is happening with us individually and ultimately collectively. And it has to be that for me, because shoot, like, I made more money in corporate, you know what I mean? Like, if it was
Mm-hmm.
like a selfish endeavor, like, I would be doing something else. So it
Yeah.
definitely has been a labor of love that is driven by my intuition and having to be very creative with putting things together to share.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I like what this is making me think of kind of segues us right into the king.
Hmm.
Because as you're explaining that journey, what it's making me think of, which I know that you've exemplified, Yolanda, is like a real commitment to it. Like, you've
Hmm.
learned it, you've owned your experience. Now you've put it out there to the degree where it's like, of course we get influenced by people's skepticism left and right. And I'm still in the knight and the queen phase, admittedly. I haven't quite tapped into the king yet, but I would say from my perspective, you have, where it's like, you're on that throne and like you're stable in the way that you are delivering this message. And like, um, you've had enough of the experience to really make it solid and be like, okay, here I am now as the king on my throne. Like, I'm taking complete ownership of this because I know it to be true and I understand how to work it.
Yeah, thank you for that. And the
Mm-hmm.
truth is, yes, in a lot of ways, the king, I, it's more of like a forced thing. It's like a obligatory. Like, sometimes I
Yeah.
feel like I have to go into that king energy because I have to be very responsible, because now
Right.
it is my work and it's
Yeah.
not just playtime, right? So there are times where I have to put on that hat of tempering some of like my playfulness or like my personal want around intuitive exploration or imagination in these things. And I have to get like super practical and very like, how does this apply and how can it be useful? And like, very much more sturdy, I guess, approach is the
Mm-hmm.
best way to say.
Yeah.
However, there are also times where I know, like, I can't stay there only. Like
Yeah.
I have got to, for my own sake and for the sake of this all remaining authentic, and for my own evolution, for my own work, my spiritual growth, but also for the evolution of what I share, I
Right.
have to sometimes dive back into that page. And I still am very much, the knight and hesitant with certain things, and then
Yeah.
develop this space where I come to the queen energy again, where I'm like, okay, I can see the balance in this. And then, so
Uh-huh.
it's totally like a rotation through these energies
Right.
that I find myself in.
And I think that's a really great point to raise, because it may be a progression the way that we're looking at it, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a recurring cycle. And once
Mm-hmm.
you kind of master the elements of each of the court cards and how they apply to your life, you're always dipping back in and seeing, like, because you dip back into one bucket and you take what you learn there and bring it back into another one, and we're evolved. That's how we evolve,
Right.
and like, as you evolve, you need to go back to this new place. So as soon as you learn something new as the king, you're like, well, this is brand new. I've never seen it before. Let me go back into the playfulness of the page so I can really start to understand what I need to refine as the knight.
Yeah, totally. Oh, I like that. Like, yeah, stay
Mhm.
with the page, refine with the knight, and then, yeah, present as the queen, and
That's right. Yeah.
we're balanced at the king. And the thing that's interesting of him is, you can see on the card, like he is on a solid platform, that concrete square that I mentioned last week. And he's surrounded by the water, and his foot is hovering above it, but it's not actually touching the
Hmm.
water. So it also speaks to that energy where, kind of like I was describing, sometimes we have to suppress maybe emotion, or being too imaginative and these types of things, so that we can actually get things done. But he's
Create the
coming,
order.
right, but he's in water. So it's like
Hmm.
what he has built was built from his creation and his passion and his imagination, intuition. Like he built from that space, and he still has access to that space, but he
Hmm.
knows that he has to be more, I guess, like grounded and reliable for the sake of who he's supporting.
Yes.
It's kind of like we're talking about how they can be symbolic of people. So if this is symbolic of a father energy, it's like people often think of the father archetype as someone who is like strong and reliable and sturdy. And yeah, they love you, but they're not necessarily thought to be as emotionally, like to display it in the same way as like the mother archetype.
Hmm. It makes me think of when you said duty, or responsibility. For me, this journey of teaching and yeah, coming from corporate to dive into this stuff,
Yeah.
um, I teach a lot, and I'm the introverted me sometimes is like, I can't get up in front of these people and try to sell something and then teach about it. Like, that's
Right.
crazy talk.
Yeah.
But I'm a teacher, and there's a sense of duty that comes with that. So even though sometimes my emotional field that is an introvert or gets insecure or is just like, my ego taps in and starts getting all like crazy emotional, and the waves of my water are all over the place. There's a duty where I have to step into the king place and be like, okay, ego, like, that's going to be what it is. You need to
Yeah.
put it aside and step up to this concrete block and do what you're supposed to be doing. So a lot of times, the king card, I think, represents the duty that's in our field of experience that we have to
Mm-hmm.
answer that call to and put these other things aside, where it's like, okay, just let me crawl up on this concrete block because the emotions are going to be there, but I
Mm-hmm.
need to figure out how to like quelch those in order to do what it is that I have to do. And that's what the king
Totally.
king does. It's like he's a leader and responsible, and sometimes he needs to set aside things that aren't poignant to what it is he's trying to achieve.
Yeah. I love that. I love that a lot. I don't know why, for some reason, it's reminding me of like a military. Like, you hear people who are in the military, and they're like, there's such this love for their brothers, or, the people that are there with them, that they are uh, in it with. And there's just like such this love and dedication to each other, this like emotional connection and like love for the country and love for like all these other layers. But then like the strong suit that they have to put on in order
Yeah.
to protect all that they love and to like take care of all that they love. And it comes from or it's displayed in a place that, it's just more, you know what I'm saying. But
Yeah.
the other thing that is popping out to me in this is like there's the little fish again, but he's in the
Yeah.
background, right? So
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, he really is this energy of like, he's a creative person, he's imaginative, he's, all of the things that even maybe the queen displays, but he just has to do it with a little more rigidness or disconnection from the emotion to get things done. Whereas she really seems like the epitome of this suit for me, because she is found out like how to have the balance and the harmony of it.
Right. Yeah.
But I get, like, I do understand that sometimes we just have to get things done,
Yeah.
and our emotions have to take a back seat, even if they are what got us there. Like, again, like with work, like God knows, like, yes, love is what got me here, but sometimes I have got to like put on a whole nother hat.
And know that the evolution of all of these and being able to master each one of those is necessary. If we don't
Right.
put on this hat of the king and we're just doing, balancing as the queen is, there could be a situation you run into where if you're not acting as the king, somebody else will lose out on an opportunity to learn something,
Yeah.
and, it kind of makes me think of towing the line of enabling people, if we're mothering them all the time instead of like taking a hard, firm action against like not enabling them, will rob them of their chance to learn and to grow.
Yeah. And it's like that thing of like, sometimes like the hard decisions have to be made, or like we have to sometimes step into different roles, even if they're not the most comfortable for us, but sometimes they're exactly what we need to support us. So again, like talking about intuition specifically, maybe not the most comfortable idea for some people, but if you really want to understand it, you got to get in there. Like you have to have that like wonderment and possibility to really explore it and understand it. But of course, you want to have that caution. I don't know why words are escaping me today. I don't know what's happening, but yeah, I think I like this. I like this conversation. I like the messages of these cards.
Yeah, I feel like we really got a lot out of this today.
Yeah, no, totally. So
Not that we
hopefully,
don't, but I feel like the court cards are challenging. So I feel like we really shed some good light on that.
yeah, and that's, again, I said this last week, but this exactly, again, highlights for me why I think this is so good to do this in a very conversational way, where we can even explore like how it relates to us. And hopefully you all listening are exploring or thinking of how these different energies relate to you. And we would love for you to share. We say that all the time, but really, like, don't be shy. Like, you never know how your perspective may inspire someone else or speak to someone else, even help and teach us to expand our points of view about these cards. So go to Facebook, MBE Project, and let us know what's coming up
Yeah.
for you.
Thanks for joining us on this conversation about emotional development.
Yes, yes. Very, very interesting.
Uh-huh.
And the next time you see us, we will be in July.
Whoa, wowzers.
Yes, it will be July, and we will be diving into the suit of wands.
I
Yeah.
think so. I don't
So
have the schedule up.
fire.
Is that
We're
where we're going
going.
next?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
yeah. So we are moving from the cups and into the wands. Fire,
Exciting.
fire.
I love the wand suit.
Yeah, that should be
It's a fun one.
yeah. So we hope that you are enjoying this and that it's helping you to build a deeper relationship with your tarot cards as well. And if you enjoy the
Or
podcast,
any relationship at all with the
yeah,
cards.
no,
Maybe you
totally.
haven't known how to get into like self-reflection or self-development, and hopefully you're finding that this could be a cool entryway.
Fun little mirrors. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you enjoy the podcast, of course, if you think anyone would enjoy this, please share it. We really appreciate it. And you can rate the show on Apple Podcast. And I mentioned last week, but I'll let you know again, we're also now available on iHeartRadio. So we have Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcast, and of course, YouTube.
MBE
So,
projects all over the place.
yes, honey.
Yeah.
We're all going to learn and grow together.
Mm-hmm.
So we will see you all next week, and we hope that you're having a lovely new season.
Yes. Happy summer.